Forget the romanticized idea of grand, luxurious castles. The reality of life inside these medieval fortresses was much different than what most people imagine. Bitter cold, lurking diseases, deadly conspiracies, and an unforgiving routine awaited those within the stone walls. But at the same time, castles were centers of power, housing kings, nobles, and warriors who shaped history. Now, picture yourself living in a medieval castle. Would you have comfort? Would life be filled with feasts and celebrations, or was it something far more brutal and relentless? More importantly, would you survive? Today, we will step through the gates, wander through dark corridors, and uncover what truly happened inside these fortresses. Stay until the end, because there is one particularly disgusting detail about castle life that no one talks about, and might change your entire perception of the Middle Ages. The birth of a castle. Why were they essential? In the Middle Ages, a castle was not just a symbol of power, but a strategic necessity. These formidable structures were crucial for maintaining control over territories, deterring invasions, and asserting dominance over rival factions. Whether built on towering hills, along rivers, or deep within forests, their location was meticulously chosen for maximum defense and visibility. Building a castle was a colossal undertaking that demanded years of planning, enormous financial resources, and a highly skilled workforce. Skilled masons, carpenters, blacksmiths, and laborers worked tirelessly under harsh conditions. The process often began with the construction of a motte and bailey, simple wooden fortress atop an artificial hill, before more durable stone castles replaced them in later centuries. The transition from wood to stone was driven by the need for stronger defenses. Wooden castles were vulnerable to fire and decay, while stone fortresses could endure brutal sieges. However, sourcing and transporting stone was no easy feat. Large limestone blocks had to be quarried, shaped, and transported over great distances, often requiring teams of oxen and weeks of grueling effort. Rochester Castle in England, built in 1127, is a perfect example. Designed to withstand Norman attacks, it had walls up to 4 meters thick, a colossal keep, and an advanced defensive system so efficient that, even after intense sieges, it remained nearly unconquerable for years. Beyond security, castles served as the heart of feudal society. From within its stone walls, the lord exercised absolute authority over his domain. The Great Hall was the political and social center, where important decisions were made, feasts were held, and justice was administered. Castles were also military bases. Knights trained in the courtyards, preparing for battle, while watchtowers allowed sentinels to spot enemies from miles away. Archers positioned along battlements could rain arrows upon attackers, while moats, drawbridges, and reinforced gates made direct assaults nearly impossible. However, castles were not impenetrable fortresses. Many fell due to betrayals, starvation, or technological advancements in siege warfare. As trebuchets and cannon technology evolved, even the mightiest castles became vulnerable. While castles provided protection, they were far from comfortable. The stone walls were cold, damp, and riddled with drafts. Sanitation was primitive, and the stench of waste, animals, and unwashed bodies lingered in the corridors. Servants worked tirelessly to maintain some semblance of order, yet disease and infestation were constant threats. From lavish feasts to brutal battles, the castle was a paradox, a place of wealth and suffering, power and fear. For those who lived within its walls, survival was not guaranteed, and luxury was a privilege reserved for the very few. Life within the walls, luxury for few, sacrifice for many. Living inside a medieval castle might seem like a privilege, but the reality was quite different. While nobles enjoyed banquets, feasts, and luxurious clothing, daily life was filled with discomforts. Castles were cold, damp, and dark, with little lighting or heating. In winter, the stone walls absorbed the cold, making the rooms nearly unbearable. In summer, the hallways were filled with the strong stench of poor sanitation and the presence of animals and servants. The nobility followed a strict routine. From an early age, aristocratic children learned good manners, Latin, and swordsmanship. Women were responsible for managing household affairs, while men focused on war and politics. But not everything was privileged. Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women of the Middle Ages, spent much of her life in castles, but was imprisoned in one for 16 years by order of her own husband, King Henry II. Meanwhile, the servants faced an even harsher reality. They worked tirelessly to keep the castle running, carrying water, cooking, cleaning, and attending to the whims of the lords. For them, the castle was not a refuge, but an exhausting workplace where a single mistake could have serious consequences. Work in castles, a complex machine. Castles were more than just fortresses. They were self-sustaining communities, functioning like small walled cities where every resident had a specific and essential role. The grandeur of these fortifications was maintained not just by nobles and knights, but by an army of workers who ensured that daily life continued smoothly. The labor force inside a castle was vast and highly hierarchical. While the lord and lady oversaw operations, their efficiency depended on a network of servants, craftsmen, and laborers. Blacksmiths and armorers, responsible for forging and maintaining weapons, armor, and horseshoes. Their role was particularly crucial during wartime. Cooks and bakers prepared massive amounts of food, often working from pre-dawn until late at night beside roaring fires. They baked hundreds of loaves of bread daily in large ovens, and meat had to be salted or smoked for preservation. Brewers. Beer was often safer to drink than water due to poor sanitation, so castles had their own brewers who ensured a steady supply of ale. Washerwomen and dyers. Clothing was washed with lye soap and river water, often in freezing conditions. Dyers worked with natural pigments to color fabrics worn by the nobility. Stable hands and farriers. Horses were essential for transportation and battle, requiring constant care. Farriers specialized in crafting and fitting horseshoes. Messengers and scribes. Communication was vital, and written records of taxes, agreements, and military orders were maintained by literate clerks who worked closely with the castle's lord. Latrine cleaners, gong farmers. One of the worst jobs in the castle. These workers had to clean out cesspits and waste deposits, sometimes knee-deep in filth. A large castle, such as Warwick Castle in England, required an astonishing 200 to 300 workers just to function daily. This number increased significantly during events such as war, royal visits, or large feasts, where extra help was brought in from the surrounding villages. The kitchen alone could have over 50 workers, including butchers, pastry chefs, spit turners, and scullery maids. Preparing meals for hundreds of people meant an endless supply of grains. Meats and vegetables had to be carefully managed and stored. In times of abundance, food was lavish and excessive, while in times of scarcity, rationing and hunger became the norm. Working in a castle was grueling, exhausting, and often dangerous. Many servants worked from sunrise to midnight, with only short breaks. The cold, damp stone floors, heavy lifting, and exposure to smoke and fire made physical ailments common. Breaking the strict rules of conduct often resulted in severe punishments. A simple mistake, such as dropping food meant for a noble, could result in a public flogging. More serious offenses, like theft, could lead to banishment or execution. Since most workers lived within the castle, being expelled meant losing food, shelter, and protection, essentially becoming a death sentence by starvation. During war or siege, the workload doubled. Defenders and laborers alike had to reinforce walls, prepare boiling oil, repair weapons, and manage dwindling food supplies. Siege conditions could last weeks or months, forcing castle inhabitants to make difficult choices: ration food, slaughter horses, or even resort to eating leather and rats. For workers, a siege was not just a battle, but a fight for survival. The constant threat of arrows, fire, and disease made the castle an unpredictable and dangerous place to live. Although castles were symbols of power and prestige, for most workers, they were places of sacrifice and struggle. Every feast, every battle, and every decision made by the nobility was only possible due to the hundreds of laborers working tirelessly in the background. Their contributions were often overlooked, but without them, no medieval castle could have functioned. They were the true backbone of the fortress. War and sieges. How did castles resist or fall to invasions? Castles were designed to withstand attacks, but in reality, many succumbed to the brutal nature of medieval warfare. Feudal lords invested fortunes in towering walls, deep moats, and reinforced gates. Yet enemy armies always found creative ways to breach these defenses. One of the most famous examples of a castle resisting a siege was Rochester Castle in 1215. The rebels defending the fortress endured months of attacks from King John of England. However, their resistance was shattered when the king's troops tunneled beneath the keep and set fire to logs soaked in pig fat, causing the structure to collapse. This event proved that even the most imposing castles had weaknesses. Attack tactics varied. Catapults were used to break down walls, battering rams to smash gates, or simply besieging a castle until its inhabitants starved. During a siege, life inside the walls became unbearable. Supplies dwindled, hunger set in, and disease spread rapidly, making surrender often inevitable. Living in a castle might have seemed safe, but in times of war, being behind stone walls did not always guarantee protection. Sometimes it only delayed the inevitable. The mysteries and secrets of castles. Behind the towering walls of a castle lay secrets that few knew. Hidden passages, concealed chambers, and even advanced espionage systems were part of daily life in these fortresses. Many castles had secret tunnels used for strategic escapes or clandestine transport of supplies during sieges. Edinburgh Castle in Scotland is a famous example. Excavations have revealed a complex, underground system that may have been used during wartime. Beyond escape routes, there were also darker secrets. Castle dungeons were feared, but not all were used for torture as many believe. Some were merely prisons for noble enemies or traitors. However, there are records of actual torture chambers in castles like Nuremberg, where terrifying medieval instruments were used. Castles also had ingenious methods of espionage. Some were built with hollow walls or disguised holes that allowed people to eavesdrop on conversations in other rooms. This was essential for kings and feudal lords who were constantly wary of betrayal. The mysteries of castles reveal that they were more than just fortresses. They were centers of intrigue, power, and carefully guarded secrets. What happened at night in castles? Night in a medieval castle was far from the peaceful image many might imagine. Without electricity, the only sources of light were torches and candles, casting eerie shadows on the stone corridors. Patrols of guards roamed the walls to ensure no invaders were near, while inside the halls, secret activities often took place. Nobles frequently held discreet meetings at night, discussing alliances, political agreements, and even conspiracies. Many castles also housed spies and informants who exchanged confidential messages under the cover of darkness. Additionally, medieval healers and physicians preferred working at night, treating the wounded and sick away from the prying eyes of other residents. But the night also brought dangers. Fire was one of the greatest threats inside castles. Candles could ignite tapestries, wooden furniture, and straw bedding, leading to irreversible tragedies. A modern example of this happened at Windsor Castle, which caught fire in 1992. But similar incidents were common in the Middle Ages, often destroying parts of fortresses. While the day in castles was filled with intense activity, the night was a time of mystery, tension, and, for many, Fear, betrayals, and conspiracies. The deadly politics inside castles were not just physical fortresses, but also political battlegrounds where betrayals and conspiracies were commonplace. Feudal lords, knights, and even royalty had to constantly watch both their allies and their enemies within their own walls. One of the most infamous betrayals occurred in 1407 when John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy, was assassinated during a peace negotiation inside a castle. The ambush was orchestrated by Louis of Orleans, his own cousin, proving that alliances could be just as deadly as wars. Beyond political assassinations, castles were also the stage for strategic poisonings. With little oversight over food preparation, it was easy for disguised enemies to mix lethal substances into banquets or drinks. Many mysterious deaths among medieval nobility were attributed to such tactics, including the poisoning of King Charles II of Navarre. Distrust among nobles was so intense that many built secret meeting rooms or slept in hidden chambers within castles to avoid nighttime attacks. In the world of medieval nobility, trusting someone was a gamble, and loyalty could vanish as quickly as a drawn blade. Marriages for power and forbidden love. In medieval castles, marriages rarely involved love. They were strategic agreements meant to consolidate alliances, expand territories, and strengthen dynasties. Young nobles often had no say in whom they would marry. This decision was made by their parents or even the king. One of the most well-known examples was the marriage of Isabella of Valois to Charles VI of France. Married at a young age, she found herself in a political union while the king suffered from bouts of madness. Later, she fell in love with another man, a forbidden romance that could have cost her life if discovered. But not all political marriages were cold. Some evolved into genuine bonds of affection, while others led to betrayals and even murder. Queens and princesses who fell in love with knights or servants faced deadly risks. A famous case was that of Marguerite Porete, who was executed on charges of heresy, but according to rumors, she had been condemned for a forbidden romance with a married nobleman. Inside castles, love was a dangerous game. Those who followed their hearts instead of politics often paid a high price. The side of castles no one talks about much is said about the grandeur of medieval castles, but few mention the most uncomfortable details of life inside these fortresses. The truth is, for most people, living in a castle was dirty, cold, and unsanitary. Hygiene was one of the biggest issues. Without modern bathrooms, the most common solution was to dump human waste into holes that led directly to moats or nearby streams. The smell was unbearable, and often, the water used for drinking and cooking was contaminated, leading to disease outbreaks. Lice and fleas were constant enemies. Even nobles suffered from infestations, as baths were rare and clothes were washed infrequently. Bedding and carpets accumulated dirt for months, turning rooms into breeding grounds for parasites. Additionally, the structure of castles, with their dark corridors and damp stone walls, encouraged mold growth, which affected the health of residents. Some believe that castles themselves contributed to the spread of epidemics like the Black Death, which devastated Europe in the 14th century. Now that you know the reality of medieval castles, the question remains, would you really want to live in one?